All right, we're good to go. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for this Thursday with our special guest, Alex Drude. But before we do that, I just want to take a little time to tell you all about some business going on. First of all, I got an email earlier today from Ernestine Miller. She is a very wonderful member of our group and a big person in Sabre. Ernestine, are you here?
I'm here.
Can
Can
you?
you see?
Yeah.
I can't. I don't see you, but which is
Well, for the first
unfortunate.
time in a while, I've been able to be on visual, so that's a plus.
But anyway, Ernestine sent me something today that I was unable to send out. I will send it out tomorrow with a review of tonight and also with next week's Zoom. But Ernestine, if you want to take a minute or two to say what's on your mind, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
I'll try,
Gary.
maybe you're on the second page. I'll see if I can find you. Yeah, you are. I see you. You're right next to me now. Wonderful.
Oh, good. That's a good place. That's an excellent place. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to tell you about Sabre Day, which is this Saturday afternoon. It's the 50th anniversary of Sabre. And this Saturday afternoon from 2 to 4 Eastern time is an amazing program that Sabre's putting on. It's the first national virtual, obviously, because we cannot in person. But the speakers are Bob Costas, who does not need any introduction, and Tim Mead, obviously, who is also the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. So 2 headline speakers in addition to them. There are some amazing testimonials from Hall of Famers. I'm not going to give away any names, but it's just wonderful who Sabre has assembled for this special event. If you go to sabre.org, Sabre Day, you can register. I can't see everybody on the call, but I'm quite sure there are Sabre members on the call tonight. And if you're not a member, it's the best deal going. It's $10.
It is.
Really
And
the best.
I will forward Ernestine's
Please
email to
forward
me.
it. Yeah.
Yes,
So thank you. But it's the 50th anniversary. It's launching. The event is being launched by this great program on Saturday afternoon. So I hope you join in because I can tell you it'll be the best 2 hours in a long time. But Gary, I have to say, of all the baseball programs in this whole country, I can't think of, I mean, I don't know them all, but certainly what you have done with this group, three times a month or 2 to 3 times a month is really commendable. So I thank you. I'm sure
Very
everybody
nice of you,
thanks you.
Ernestine. Thank you.
But it really is, I would say probably no other group meets as frequently. So you really have done a great job, and I can see that everybody supports what you've done and enjoys the camaraderie of the group. So thank you.
Very, very kind words. Thank you so much.
What's the time on Saturdays, Ernestine?
What is what?
What is the time of the meeting on Saturday?
2 o'clock Eastern time, 2 to 4.
Eastern.
A couple of other things before I turn it over to Bill for a quick moment. I want to welcome all. Alex had asked me if he could allow some of his compatriots to come aboard tonight, and all of his friends. You are always welcome. If you like what we're doing, just you can get my email and join us on future meetings. But you guys are all welcome. I know that Alex sent me a list of about 10 or 12 people, so thank you so much for coming. And Norm Coleman, who's right next to Ernestine, he's been on here frequently. He sent me an email a couple of weeks ago. Says he has every San Francisco Giant autograph since 1958, Norm?
Yes, since they moved here.
Yeah, we got to talk about that one day. That's very, very interesting.
That's unbelievable.
I actually go back to 1950 now.
Wow. And even if they played one game?
One game, yeah.
Unbelievable. All right.
What's your address?
How many players? Yes.
San Francisco Giants is like 930 something players, I think. I've lost track because of all the players they've added in these last couple of years. It's over 900.
Wow.
Many of them are quite forgettable. Anyway, I'm allowed to say that for the ones who don't know me, I am a huge San Francisco fan. Great, crazy actually. Just in the future weeks coming up, next week we got the wonderful Perry Barber, who is an umpire historian on the Giants. She should be lots and lots of fun and informative. Then we'll have, for those who want to join us, the San Francisco Giant. Looking forward to the 2021 season. Gripe session, whatever it is you want to call it. Just whoever wants to come aboard with us. Then we have Dave Lippman, who will be talking about the team that no one will forget, the 1951 New York Giants. And then we have, for those of you who don't know, Jerry Eisenberg on February 25th, who's just, he's over 90. He's an acclaimed journalist. When I was growing up, he was part of Sports Extra on Channel 5 here, and he was huge friends with Larry Doby and Monty Irvin. He's going to be talking about the New York Giants, but I scheduled him to be on the 25th because that would have been Monty Irvin's 102nd birthday. And he has just a tremendous amount of stories on the New York Giants, and I think he will be an incredible guest. Bill, you want to make it quick so then we could turn it over?
I will. And
over to Alex.
a follow-up, thanks to Stu, he pointed me in the direction of Tom Flynn, who's the great nephew of Tom Sheehan. And his name came up referencing Bill Rigney last week. And of course, when Riggs was forced to step down by Horace, Stoneham appointed Sheehan on an interim basis to be the manager. He'd been a great scout. And this is what he wrote back. And it's some interesting things on a guy who's kind of fallen between the pages of the Giants' history. He said, he told me that you may remember that he was known for the 1916 season where he oversaw he was part of the Connie Mack Pathetics. He compiled a 1-16 record. What a great start. As you mentioned, he was known as a super scout. Some say he was the first to earn that distinction. He worked for the Giants in spring training as an instructor and a troubleshooter. He earned his first paycheck from the Giants in 46. He's been in pro ball from 1913 to 44. He pitched for 8 minor league teams, 4 major league teams, followed by scouting and coaching assignments with the Reds from 33 to 36, the Dodgers 38, the Braves 44, and a 5-year run as the Minneapolis Millers manager 39 to 43. Following his resignation from the Braves, he worked as a hotel detective.
If I turn on this video, it's going to show us.
Okay. He worked as a hotel detective at the Stevens Hotel in Chicago. One night in October of 45, when the World Series was in Chicago, Sheehan was asked to stop by a room where a loud party was disturbing other guests. The party turned out to be a group of baseball men, many of whom recognized Sheehan. It was reported that Horace Stoneham invited Sheehan to join them for a drink. He also offered Sheehan a job for the 46 season. The plan was for Sheehan to help the Giants pitchers during spring training and then hit the road as a scout. But Stoneham had just purchased the Minneapolis Millers, the reorganized Millers front office, and players were already turning against first-year manager Zeke Ventura, just weeks into his tenure. Stoneham tapped Sheehan to take Venura's place, and he managed the club throughout the 47 season. Sheehan became a full-time Giant scout in 48, and here's what you all want to hear. He was instrumental in the success the Giants had with international acquisitions, including Orlando Cepeda, the Alou brothers, Ruben Gomez, and Juan Marichal. He was also credited with signing Gaylord Perry. When I spoke with Cepeda and Marichal a few years ago, they both expressed eternal gratitude for the kindness and helpfulness they received when they were young players from my from Sheehan. Sheehan also helped Willie Mays invest in his first big paydays and lived in the house next to Mays for many years. Much has been written about Sheehan and Stonum's friendship over the years, usually downplaying Sheehan's qualifications and years of experience within the Giants organization. My research has shown that much of this was a result of newspaper columnists, especially Dick Young, who were eager to direct blame for an unperforming and dysfunctional team that was both young and divided along racial and ethnic lines. Sheehan was unable to bring the team together, but he does deserve credit for making Felipe Alou an everyday player and for promoting Marichal in 1960. I'll never forget that day. It was my mother's 35th birthday, the day that Juan broke in, a day I'll never forget. Sheehan certainly benefited from his friendship with Stonum, but his role within the organization was much more important than drinking buddy of the owner, as it is often characterized. Along with Chub Feeney and Carl Hubble, Sheehan was a key member of the Giants' inner circle from the late 40s until 1976. As early as 1953, he was referred to as the, quote, court of last resort when an important decision has to be made. I think that's a great testament to a man who's certainly overlooked and sometimes disparaged unfairly in Giants history.
And Tom has been on these calls before, and I'd recommend if he's willing that I have him on sometime to talk about Tom Sheehan.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bill. Why don't we get started with our program? This man, Alex Drude, wrote a great book, our guest tonight, called, I don't know, get me on here. There it is. He has the book. Here's my book, 26 in a row. Unfortunately, when he originally did it, I believe, as a Kindle, and then he turned it into a book this year and wanted to do a whole book tour, and of course, was thwarted by COVID. So we were lucky enough for the holidays. I received a book from my sister-in-law, and this was the book. And I was like, wow, this is brand new. Let me see if I could get in touch with this man. And I Facebooked him, and my Facebook name is Gary Paperman, and I don't know how why he answered it, but he did, and that led to tonight. So it's my pleasure to introduce Alex Drude. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Funny thing, the 1916 Philadelphia A's do make an appearance in this September of the Giants, because that was one of the games where they set the record for lowest attendance in Major League history in the 1900s at 25 or possibly 22. We're not really sure. Not really sure. There were some conflicting reports. 25 was the most at that A's game. Very crazy. Anyway, Gary, thank you for finding me and inviting me to this. I have been to a few of the meetings previous to this. And the crazy thing is that usually when I am talking to baseball people, I know more than anybody else. In the last 2 weeks, I have not said a word, because you guys, knowing what you know about the New York Giants, especially in the 50s, with Ed being a ball boy or the bat boy for the team, I have just been sitting here learning from you guys, so with me having a chance to say anything that you guys don't know is amazing. So you guys have a tremendous group here going, so much history going on. So you guys deserve a round of applause for yourselves. Know that and with Gary, you saving all this, recording this is tremendous right here. Also, thank you to everybody who I know who's here. We got Oregon in the house, we got Southern California in the house, and we have the Bay Area in the house a little bit. So thank you all for doing this. So my book, 26 in a Row, centers on the month of September in 1916, when the Giants won what is now currently the Major League record of 26 games in a row. There's a few people who will dispute that. We can talk about that a little bit. The 1916 Giants, very interesting sort of team. Usually when you hear Giants team winning 26, you assume it's a team that either won the pennant or the World Series or what have you. But these guys, for the most part, are not the guys who were involved in any of the Giants teams that won the 3 in a row, the pennants from 11, 12, and 13. Nor are most of them the guys who were involved in that stretch of Giants teams that won 4 straight pennants. I believe might have been the first team to win 4 straight pennants from 21 through 24, winning their last 2 World Series with McGraw in 21 and 22. This is mostly the team that won the 1917 National League pennant and lost to the Chicago White Sox in that year's World Series. The 16 team, how I came about to know about it is I read a blurb in a book when I was about 10 years old. The 1916 Giants won a major league record 26 in a row. And I always wanted to read a book about that team because there are books all over, the 1919 Black Sox, right? There are 65 books on them and counting on that. They're, the Miracle Braves of 1914. And I could never find a real proper book about the 1916 team. So I finally decided to write it myself, and it is set up a bit of a day-to-day kind of, not diary per se, but merely a journal of what is happening in New York and the world going on at that time. So it does deal with World War I happening in Europe. There are mentions of that, and then all the various things that are happening in New York and even the world as it relates to around those times. And it's amazing and of course, baseball, whatever is going on in there. If there is one guy that you should know from this 1916 team, one guy whose name has been lost to history that should be remembered, and that is Ferdy Shupp, the pitcher. And Dan Levitt, I believe, knows this guy because he wrote an article, which I took some of the stats that he looked it up. So
I was obsessed with him. So yeah, that's good.
yes. And this fella, as Dan knows very well, is Ferdy Shupp. Ferdy Shupp, in this September streak of winning 26 in a row, he threw 6 games, all complete games. So he threw 54 innings during this streak. He gave up 3 runs. He gave up 3 runs in 54 innings and finished with a ERA for that year of 0.9 in 140 innings. He had a 0.9 ERA, which is, Dan, you may know it. It's one of the lowest ERAs ever. It is quite up there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you get back to you, but yeah, I've spent a lot of time. I mean, it should be recognized as the lowest ERA of all time because he was recognized at the time. There wasn't the same rules there are today, or the 10 complete game rules. He was, every magazine had him as the ERA champion, 0.9, and he wasn't. In fact, no one started looking at Dutch Leonard until after World War II as the all-time single season leader. If you look at the old, Spalding record books, it was always Shupp until after World War II.
So what happened was originally the ERA title, you had to pitch 12 games. That was when 1916, that was the entire qualification. Starting in 1917, it was 10 complete games. And only after World War II did they decide it was 1 inning per game, which at the time was 154 innings. So what baseball did after World War II was they went back and changed who was the ERA leaders for 40, 50 years worth. So Shupp got thrown out of the record books and he was replaced by the great Grover Cleveland Alexander. And Alexander had a tremendous 1916 season. I mean, you could argue it was one of the best. It was his best season overall. He had 30 complete games. He threw, I think, 15 shutouts. I wrote it down so I don't have to remember, but 15 shutouts, which is a record by far for one season. And but Shupp got rewritten out of the record book. So he's the most important guy. He was born in Louisville, 1890, and made to the major leagues with the Giants in 1913. John McGraw had this habit of buying guys and then just stashing them on the bench, not putting them in the minor leagues or anything like this. He did this with a ton of guys throughout his major league career. Shupp was one of them. So he pitched like a game a year. You look at his stats on Baseball Reference, he pitched a game a year, 2 games a year, 5 games a year, but no minor leagues. Because what McGraw did was he wanted to teach the guys what his way of playing baseball. And that did not mean going to the minors and learning from somebody else. It meant learning it from McGraw. So McGraw had a ton of these guys who just sat on the bench, and there were roster limits, but there were no limits as to how many guys you could have a contract, how many guys you could have sitting around with you. So these guys, Shupp included, sat on the bench, and McGraw, when he decided, would put them in a game. And Shupp eventually, in the summer of 1916, as the Giants changed, this is also the 1916 team, won a record 17 straight games on the road in early May. And then they went into a tailspin, and McGraw changed all these players around, and eventually Shupp got a chance. He basically stayed in the rotation by luck, and in September he went on his great run. Gary, obviously, if you have any questions to throw at me around this, if anybody does have any questions, we can go on. But I wanted to make sure the first guy, if you take away one thing from this, the guy to remember is Dan knows, and I know, and now you know, Ferdy Shupp is the man.
Alex, before you go any further, if anybody's interested in this book that I have, that you're showing, what would be the best way to get your book?
Yes, the best way is Amazon. It's a self-published book. I do not have a publisher because I just wanted to do this and get it out there. It's on Amazon. If you search for 26 in a row, it is available on Kindle. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you can download it, right now. You can also buy the book on there as a paperback version.
And this is your first venture into authoring, so to speak?
Yes, as far as anything like this. I have been a journalist and a writer in newspapers and television and such for going on 20 years now, or more than that at this point. As I see some people who, at least one who I worked with my very first job in television, she's here right now, and she can tell you now it's longer than 20 years. So yes.
Alex, where'd you go to school?
I'm a Bay Area kid. And I ended up graduating college from the University of Kansas. So the Jayhawks there, they're a very good journalism program, William Allen White, all that stuff. So I am a Jayhawk. Went out there just to see what I could see, because it was completely different from growing up in the Bay Area. By the way, I don't know if you guys have seen the shirt. I got the double up right here. We got both. We got both logos going on. I'm sure you all have this shirt yourself. But I had to do it today.
Are there plans for the book to be sold at the dugout stores at the stadium?
I haven't contacted any of the Giants representatives, even though I do currently work in the Bay Area in broadcasting and do have some contacts. I did this as basically a labor of love because it hasn't been anything. And so even just to get your thing, to have Steve get a copy is, I'm pumped with that it's selling to people.
My feeling was that if they don't accept it in the store, they have the Gotham Club where it should really be displayed there, because that's really more than anything relating to the Giants. So yes. I apologize for interrupting.
No.
More about your book or field questions, but I think speak a little more
Gary,
about.
Just one quick question. Alex, of the 26 games, how many were home and how many were on the road?
Here is another thing about baseball in those days. Those are all home games, all consecutive. The way the schedule worked for years until basically the jet age and the Giants and the Dodgers moving to the coast, the West Coast. For me, it's just the coast. But the way it worked was you would be at home for 20 to 30 games. This was standard practice around baseball. And then you would go on the road for 20 to 30 games. Like, for instance, we'll just take a thing right now. The Mets, right? They're playing the Cardinals in St. Louis. you go and you go to St. Louis, you fly to St. Louis and you finish your series here, and then you show up there and you start the series the next day. Well, until the jet age, it was trains. You couldn't do, and it was all day games. So you couldn't just go. So your road trips would basically be, you would go play everybody on the road trip. The Eastern teams were the Giants, the Phillies, the Braves, and the Dodgers. And then the Western teams were Pittsburgh, the Reds, the Cubs, and the Cardinals. So in the first month of the season, the Eastern teams all played each other. The Western teams all played each other in a bit of a round robin kind of thing. And then you'd go on the road. So the Giants remember, only 8 teams, they played all 7 other teams during this 26-game stretch. They beat everybody, which is astounding. But this was also their 17-game road trip, was their first major road trip of the season. They won 17 straight, all on the road consecutively. The Detroit Tigers in 1984 tied the road record, but that was basically within a month. They won 6 games here and went home for a week and went back out and all that. But the Giants, it was basically 19 days because a lot of cities still at that time did not allow the Sunday blue laws. So that, Paul, thank you for asking that question. That brings it in. The Giants basically changed completely between the 17-game road winning streak in May and the 26-game win streak in September. And that has much to do with John McGraw, the manager, rebuilding the team, because Christy Mathewson left the Giants in the summer of 1916. He had run into arm trouble. Hello. It is basically why the team fell and finished in last place in 1915 for the first time in their time in New York.
Shot. I got a call today. They're giving it to us sometime.
And so McGraw rebuilt the team completely within then. He traded, the biggest trade was, well, at least beginning, was trading Mathewson, who of course had been on the Giants for a dozen years and, arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest pitcher of all time, dead ball era. We know where your opinions are because you're Giants people. Other people will say other people, but we'll go with the greatest. And Mathewson wanted to manage if he couldn't play. So McGraw rigged a trade with the Cincinnati Reds to let Mathewson go manage. And as a result, the manager of the Reds at the time was Buck Herzog. And Herzog, who had played for the Giants twice previously and had been traded away twice previously, McGraw wanted him for his infield. He was a second baseman. So he traded McGraw, Ed Roosh, and Bill McKechnie, who would go on to be Hall of Famers in their own right, basically, for Herzog and a couple other guys, I believe. I can't remember. But the big it was Herzog to help that. And so that was July 1916. It was huge news to finally have McGraw leave the team. So McGraw kept rebuilding the team. The biggest other move that he did that actually, I believe, really made people set up the trade deadline. The trade deadline, there was no such thing as a trade deadline. The National League and American League agreed to their first ever trade deadline of July 31st the following year, because in August of that year, McGraw traded for Heine Zimmerman from the Cubs and gave up Larry Doyle, who had been the Giants' first baseman through a number of those pennant-winning years of 11, 12, and 13. Zimmerman was the Cubs' third baseman. He was a disgruntled Cubs third baseman, and he was also one of those guys who now gets thrown around as one of those guys who was involved in perhaps the gambling or the throwing of the games before the 1919 Black Sox thing came to light. If you look at any of the newspapers, which is what the most of my research was for this book, they mention gambling and the odds and everything. So the idea that baseball was super clean and then only one rogue group of gamblers came in and the Black Sox scandal happened and then it got cleaned up right after and everyone was out. That is complete hogwash. It was there. guys threw games. There's Heine's, or at least took money and perhaps did not play their best. Heine Zimmerman was notorious for being one of those guys, as is the great Hal Chase, who, in addition to being a tremendous first baseman, was also not averse to doing this. Hal Chase shows up in this book, and he actually did play for the Giants eventually in 1920. So McGraw completely remakes the team. Let's see, Larry Doyle was the first baseman. He was replaced. Fred Merkle was the first baseman. Larry Doyle was the second baseman, and they were both replaced. Merkle, of course, of the famous Merkle's boner of 1908. And one of the other things I wanted to write this book for was because 1908, because the Cubs ended up winning the pennant and winning the World Series that year, everything is always written to favor the Cubs in that part. And no one had written a part where it was like, hey, the Giants got screwed here. So I kind of wanted to write, hey, the Giants got screwed, and actually have it on paper that they got screwed. And they did, because that famous game where they tagged Merkle out for leaving and going to the clubhouse, that rule, there was the rule, it was technically in place that the guy had to go touch the bag. And so when the game-winning hit for the Giants to beat the Cubs that day in September, it was standard practice for guys to leave and run to their clubhouse when the game-winning hit was made and the winning run touched. Merkle was a rookie. He took off for the clubhouse. The Cubs knew about this. They were ready for this. They had a ball, even if it wasn't the proper ball, ready to touch second base to force the third out and do that. But that rule, as far as I know, had never been enforced before that game and was never enforced after that game. It was only the Merkle's boner play of 1908. And nobody, and in all the histories, it's always like, well, it happened. It's like, it happened once. And so I needed to do that. And also for the eventual makeup game where the Giants did lose to the Cubs in that makeup game that had to be replayed because they ended up finishing in a dead heat. The Giants played something like 8 games in 8 straight days leading up to that. Whereas the Cubs finished their season on the Monday and had 2 days off. And the replay game ended up being on the Wednesday, I believe it was, at the Polo Grounds in 1908. So as you can tell, even though the book is nominally about 1916, it goes all over the place in order to explain the history of baseball and what it was coming in to this. So,
say, Alex, this is Stu in Minnesota, and I was glad that. Hi, how you doing? I appreciated that you at least alluded to the fact that there are some sticklers out there to deal with the number. I'm the kind of stickler who counts decades starting with the year 1. So, but yeah, so I look at this as a 27-game unbeaten streak for the Giants as opposed to a 26-game winning streak. But from your earlier comments, I take it I'm not alone. I at least have a few fellow sticklers.
There are sticklers out there in the unbeaten. There are also people who will claim that the winning streak is really two 13-game winning streaks with a tie game in the middle. And so it shouldn't count at all, which is the interest. And I disagree with that entirely. In fact, a couple of years ago, when the Cleveland Indians won 22 straight games, there were definitely some arguments out there that the Indians should own the all-time winning streak at 22 straight because the Giants had the break. The issue is this is game 13 Stu is talking about. Yes, 27-game unbeaten streak. The 26th game, the middle game in there, game actually what happened to be game 13, was a complete game, 9-inning game, tie game, 1-1, called on account of rain. And so but the rules in those days it was nothing like today where it was like, well, we'll pick it up from where we left off and all that. The rule that time was you replayed the whole game. So they replayed the whole game the next day. The Giants and the Pirates, who it happened against, ended up playing 3 doubleheaders in a 5-day span because of the Sunday Blue laws. They played a Saturday doubleheader Sunday that they were technically off. Monday they played a scheduled doubleheader, with this game being the quote unquote nightcap, even though no lights, so it was just the latter half of the day as opposed to a nightcap. And then they replayed the entire the game, and the next game the next day. The 13th game is and of course the Giants won those two games. The name of the book is not the 14-game winning streak, obviously, but the 13th game is actually very interesting. It is one of the very first games of Burley Grimes, who is one of the great spitball pitchers of the era, and I can never know how to pronounce his first name. It was Burley. Anyway, Grimes, you know who the guy is if you know anything about the dead baller. One of the greatest spitball pitchers of all time. And it was his second or third game in the majors. He had just been brought up from when he was playing in Alabama at the time. And so he held this Giants team, which had somehow gotten into a great streak with Heidi Zimmerman now playing for them, and Buck Herzog. The lineup had finally been solidified after their malaise, and he held them. It was a rainy day. He had a spitball going. Clearly, nobody could hit the ball that day, and the Giants nearly lost that game, but then it ended up being a tie, and they replayed it the next day. There was one Hall of Famer that did play for the Giants during this streak. However, he was terrible. And I mention him in this name without his original, which is nickname that we all know him by, because at the time he was just a skinny 6'4" kid from San Francisco who happened to be tall. 6'4" was very tall in baseball at that point. And he just hiked his pants up a lot. So I name him by his given name throughout this, because if you knew who he was, you would say, well, why weren't they playing him? And so the kid's name was George Kelly. He was 20 years old at the time. And we all know him now as High Pockets Kelly, who was, McGraw called him one of the greatest clutch hitter he had ever seen. And he was a key part of those Giants teams that ended up winning those four straight pennants in 21, 22, 23, 24. But at this time, he was a 20-year-old. McGraw kept insisting he could play first base and kept sticking him at first base, and he was terrible. You look at his stats, he's batting like 150, 180 for the season, just awful. And so McGraw kept trying to put him in there. He's like, this is my first baseman of the future. He's going to be the first baseman, and he kept being terrible. And McGraw could not use him. So though technically he did play for the Giants during the streak, he was terrible. The man who ended up replacing him and playing very well for the Giants was a fellow named Walter Holtby, who is one of those guys who's kind of fallen. His notable claim to fame, aside from this, is he appeared in the longest major league game ever played, which is the 26-inning game between the Braves and the Dodgers, which happened in 1920. All right, I'll take a pause. We'll have questions. We can go on. If anyone
Alex,
has.
I got a couple of questions.
Of course.
First one, the two questions are this. What made you decide to use the cover you used? And the second question is, the Miami Dolphins had that perfect season. And then anytime that perfect season gets close, and then the other team loses, they celebrate. Were you ever nervous about any team going past 26 or in the future if that happens and then nobody's going to be interested?
Right. Well, it's a different game. First, I'll explain the cover. The uniforms of the Giants, obviously, it's like, what, we're looking at orange and black all around here. Why is my cover purple? What's going on here? McGraw redid the uniforms almost all the time. I don't know who actually did the uniforms. I'm assuming it's McGraw because he had all thing. So the Giants colors this year, it was a purple window pane check kind of thing. The colors, if you check the Dress to the Nines exhibit on the Hall of Fame exhibit, the Giants wore purple. They had purple trim. this big window pane. It's like a monstrous suit. Like guys would wear suits, but their main colors were purple with this checkerboard going on. And actually orange and black, I believe, didn't show up on the Giants till even the early 30s. I'm not sure.
It'd be later.
Maybe even a little later. And for even in the 30s, the Giants colors were blue and orange, which we now know is the Mets colors. So at some point, I'm sure some of you, if you have a blue and orange Giants cap, I can see Frank's got one. If you got it, yeah, and Harvey, you got that. If you're wearing a blue and orange cap, you're going to think people are going to think you're pulling for the Mets instead of actually being Giants.
It happens all the time.
I'm certain it does. Unless you run into the right people.
The
cap I'm wearing is supposedly a replica of the 1934 version that the Giants wore in honor of the All-Star game. If you could see that.
Yes.
That wasn't, I don't know if that was the logo that was on it. My kids found this and gifted it to me. And it drives everybody crazy because it's blue with white, the white NY.
Yankees.
And I first wore it when the Mets were playing Kansas City in the World Series, I guess 5-6 years ago. And a couple of Mets fans creeped up on me from behind. They were about to rag me because they thought it was a KC hat. And then I turned around, they were totally befuddled. I didn't bother explaining to them because they were just nasty. But so, yeah, the colors are
cool.
Who knows when orange and black came in, but orange and black is what I usually wear.
Right.
1933.
33, there it is.
30,
You know, you can walk
actually,
around.
1933, 34, and 35, they were black and orange. In 36, they went to blue and white.
There it is.
You know, you can walk around the Bay Area. You go to Oracle Park and I always go, when I go to San Francisco, I always bring a lot of New York stuff with me. And I wear a New York Giant hat and just have people saying, how come you're wearing a Mets hat?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that happens a lot.
Not an attack on the Bay Area fans, but maybe it is an attack on the Bay Area fans. I don't know if it was in the book. Maybe I read it somewhere else. And if you don't have the answer, though I think you will, Perry might know. Didn't McGraw and Matheson live in the same apartment building in New York? Because Mrs. McGraw was kind of watching over Mrs. Matheson. I somewhat read that somewhere.
Yeah.
It's true,
Yes,
right?
they did. They were
okay,
all
you're
best
right.
friends for a long time.
Because they were so opposite, but I think that's
Well, Jane McGraw and Jane Matheson and Blanche McGraw were pretty much the same age. I mean, I think they were almost exactly the same age. So the two of
Is that
them were
right?
really good friends. Yeah,
they were the same age.
pretty close. I mean, if Blanche McGraw was older, it was by no more than a year or two.
What was the difference between McGraw and Matheson age-wise? Had to be
About 9 years.
Yeah.
Oh, it's only 9 years. Okay,
Yeah,
then that's possible.
It's
Makes sense.
crazy.
Okay.
It is crazy because you look at pictures of McGraw from this year, at least, and he looks like super.
Grandpa.
He's 43. He's 43 in 1916. You look at him, and even in the 11, 12, 13 pictures of that from when they were going to the World Series, he's like maybe 40 at that point. And he just looks. McGraw lived hard. Let's put it that way.
He lived hard.
He lived
so
hard, yeah.
worked out.
Alex, when I was referring to the cover, I meant why Mathewson on the cover more than anything.
It's really because Mathewson's one of the most famous guys who was involved.
Associated with the Giants. Okay.
Yes, associated with the Giants. Plus, this is from his first time back when he was manager of the Reds in the summer of 1916.
The cover's I love the cover. It's great. Really is.
And the man in the middle is Buck Herzog, who they were traded for. So you think about this cover. You have McGraw on one side, you have Matheson on the other side, who is his favorite player, and then you have Buck Herzog, who had basically been traded away from his Cincinnati team back to McGraw, and has no doubt been asked to come in this picture. It's like Herzog must be like, what the hell am I doing here? I should not be here. Here's a guy who traded me away from the team I was on to come back, and McGraw and Herzog hated each other. This is not particularly hidden, but Herzog's like, screw it, you're the best manager I ever played for. Let's go for it. So that's how they got along. And when you have to pick a picture of that team if you can put Christy Mathewson in the Reds uniform in there, you're going to confuse people anyway. And so that's going to be happy.
Yeah, that's a great cover. I really like it.
I'm wearing the 30-35 New York Giants.
What are you saying?
Mars, you sound like the Charlie Brown's
I know.
teacher again.
May I interject something?
Yes, Mary.
Alex, in defense of Hank O'Day, who was the umpire who made the decision not to let the game continue after the winning run scored, but then was disallowed because Merkel hadn't touched second base. And you're absolutely correct that it was standard practice at the time. And particularly since Merkel had been riding the bench for a lot of that season. And he was used to just getting up and running right to the clubhouse in center field, the way you described. But it was the only decision that Hank O'Day could make, because 2 weeks earlier, he had a game in Pittsburgh with the Cubs, right, where a player named Warren Gill did exactly the same thing. He ran off before he touched second base. O'Day had been working by himself that day. And when the Cubs complained about it to him, he said, look, you're right. If that runner didn't touch second, I should not have allowed that run to score because it was a force play. And that's an immutable rule. No run may score when the third out of any half inning is the result of a force play. But because he was the only umpire working that day, he was looking at the runner touching the plate, not what was going on out or not going on out at second base. But he told them that he would be vigilant about that play if it ever happened again. So when it happened in New York, he had absolutely no choice because the Cubs knew that he was aware of something like that happening again. That's why he had to call Merkel out and say, the game is tied. We can't finish it. We can't resume it because by then the field was overrun with the fans and it was getting dark. So that was why they had to play the replayed game a couple of weeks later when they wound up with identical 1-loss records at the end of the season, which was remarkable of itself, because the Giants kind of fell apart the last. But yeah, so please don't blame the umpire for that. And and we shouldn't blame Fred Merkel either, because he was a very astute ball player. And John McGraw often went to him for advice about strategy and things like that. So a lot of people, still call it Merkel's boner when it really wasn't. Although it was his transport to immortality, it was a very unfair misnomer. And I just want to make that clear. No. And Hank O'Day was not the villain in that. He had integrity in making. It took a lot of balls to make that play, because it's the kind of call you make and you're going to take heat for it. And he stuck to his guns. And Bill Pulliam, the president of the National League, who backed him up, same thing. He had nothing but cojones in backing up O'Day on that play, and he paid for it. I mean, they were both vilified in the New York press, and Pulliam wound up, mysteriously killing himself. Although I have my doubts about that too. Just a few weeks later, in a hotel room or the downtown athletic club, I think he was in his room and he wound up, blasting his eyes out of his skull or something really unpleasant. Right. He had problems anyway. Apparently, he was a little mentally unbalanced. But yeah, so that's the truth about that play. Hank O'Day did the right thing, and he had no choice but to make that call.
One of the things I wondered about was the Pittsburgh play. And when I was, I think, doing the first book on the Polo Grounds, I was trying to see if that got mentioned in the New York newspapers. And I was wondering how widespread the near incident in Pittsburgh was around the league. Because one of the things I thought, if McGraw had been aware of that and how Warren Gill almost ended up as Merkel, that he might have told his players to be on the lookout for this. But I don't know if McGraw would have been aware of it at that time on September 23rd.
Right.
Yeah.
I certainly don't blame Hank O'Day or anything like that. If anybody, Johnny Evers should be the man, because he was the Cubs guy who knew what
Who
was up,
called
and
for the ball.
Right.
Yeah.
he alerted O'Day at the time in that Pittsburgh game. That is the story. He alerted
Yes.
O'Day, hey, this guy
Right.
should be out and we should be going on, as
Right.
opposed to that. So it is basically the transference of Evers and O'Day both being in Pittsburgh for that play to happen, and then 2 weeks later to be in New York for that momentous, fateful play to have happened. And yes, it's when he took off, and they couldn't have replayed the 10th, couldn't play the 10th at all, because everyone was on the field, because that's how fans exited the ballpark at the time.
Yeah, and as it turns out, 1908 winds up being the last time the Cubs win the World Series for 108 years.
Right. They paid their penance.
Right.
So anyway, I blame the Cubs. I continue. So,
Alex, can you help me put this streak in the context of the entire season? I'm looking at this.
Yes. No,
The
Bill,
Giants,
it's
86 and 66.
Yes.
That means when they weren't in the midst of the streak, they were 40 and 66.
Yes.
How can they turn it on, turn it off? What's going on here?
Well, a lot of it is the changing of the roster mid-season that McGraw did. Like, his entire infield basically changed between May, when they won that 17-game winning streak, and September, when this happened. And he was still figuring things out, because like I said, with the no trade deadline, he was able to pick up Zimmerman, who was a tremendous hitter from the Cubs, on August 28th. He had been suspended by the Cubs. The Cubs were not going to let him play for them again. And he basically rebuilt a lot of the team, and also figured out the pitching, because Mathewson, part of the reason he traded Mathewson was Mathewson could not pitch anymore. His arm was dead. He was done as a pitcher. And although he had a little bit he helped in May, he saved a couple of games during the May streak, McGraw did not have the ability to do it. So this September team that did all this is basically a team that was put together in the final month and a half. Just to go through quickly the players who are on the team, one of them, the center fielder, is Benny Koff, who is known as the Ty Cobb of the Federal League, and is one of the great, remembered as one of the great players of the Federal League. He was their center fielder. The right fielder was a fellow named Dave Robertson, who was basically one of the power hitters of the time. I think he hit like 11 home runs that year. Left field was a fellow named George Burns, who is not the Detroit first baseman, nor George and Gracie, but the third guy. And he was he's from Utica, New York, and ran a pool hall for years. His dad ran a pool hall, and then he went home and ran the pool hall when he was done. He was their leadoff guy. He got hits. The real thing was Larry Doyle and Merkel were basically done kind of with their careers, for at least what McGraw could see with them. And so he moved them on, and the lineup basically came. But it's very weird. They won 86 games, and without the 26-game winning streak, and like you said, the 17-game winning streak, they're awful. They are terrible, which is part of the bizarreness of the entire thing. But it's basically a team that's being rebuilt on the fly. This virtually the same roster that won the 26 straight in 1916 rolled to the 1917 pennant. They won something like 94 games or something like in 1917. Didn't even come close to being challenged for the pennant that year. And so it's basically this team, and it's because of the rules of the day, really, with the not trade deadline and not allowing anything else, that he was able to do this and build all these guys onto there.
Thank goodness. Yeah. Thank
Robert,
you.
go ahead.
At the end of the season, and I think this is after the streak is over, the Giants lost a game to the Dodgers, who won the pennant that year.
Yes.
And McGraw walked out on the team and accused them of throwing the game, et cetera. Can you comment on that? Did your research shed any light on that particular incident?
Absolutely. That is it. McGraw walked off the team after that because he said they laid down on it, and he did not manage them for at least three of the final 5 games in Brooklyn. Herzog took over basically as the acting manager because he had been the manager in Cincinnati. And was that, so he took over the last 3 games, and there was actually several in the epilogue kind of thing. There were several inquiries because McGraw said, my guys laid down and let Brooklyn win the pennant, because at the time the pennant was basically a 3 to 4 way race between them, the Phillies, who had won the pennant in 1915, and the Braves, who were still going off that 1914 high. So the National League did inquire to that, but they basically swept that under the rug and said, no, like 2 months later, they're like, forget it. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
But yes, that absolutely is mentioned in there. And part of the part, I believe that they lost that was because McGraw pushed his players so hard. And you can really argue that they should have won any of those 3 World Series in 11, 12, and 13. But McGraw insisted that everybody play hard every day. Like the Giants had exhibition games that they played in between to get around these blue laws. They played exhibition games against like the Yankees on Sundays at the Polo Grounds and called them like charity games. But it was really a way to keep his guys going. As a matter of fact, the guy who was supposed to be the starting third baseman for the Giants to start 1916 was Hans Lobert, who Ed Logan may know of because he was a scout for the Giants for years afterwards. He was with the team some 50 years, and he ended up being a scout for them, even moved with them to San Francisco and stayed as a scout. Lobert, the day before the season, they're playing an exhibition game like against Yale or something like that. And Lobert tore his knee going into third base, trying to stretch like a double into a triple, because McGraw insisted that these guys go 100 miles an hour every day that they were playing for him. So I think part of the Brooklyn thing was they pushed so hard and they won these 26 straight games. They even had a mathematical chance at the pennant until they lost that game, the game that broke the streak, to the Braves. Then mathematically, if they had won out, they had a chance to finish tied with the Dodgers and the Phillies and the Braves at 90 and 62, because they were 60 and 62 when the streak started. So if they had won 30 straight games and finished 19 and finished, there was a mathematical chance they could have won. So I think they were just tired as hell. And as soon as that was over, they tried the first game against the Dodgers. In game 2, they were like, I'm done here. And they were like half going after baseballs and all that. And so McGraw said, these guys threw it out. And I think part of it is just like they were done.
Hey, Alex, there was also talk at the time. There were several ex-Giants on Brooklyn. Chief Myers, the catcher,
Yes.
and Fred Merkel at first base.
Yes.
And there was talk that some of the Giants players wanted to see them win the pennant, and if they couldn't, and not somebody else.
Yeah, there's absolutely, and that is that's in the newspapers of the day, that the Giants were like, hey, if we can't do it, let's have the Dodgers do it. Because, the rivalry that we know of as Giants Dodgers, it was there, but it wasn't like there. I mean,
no, not like it was later.
No, not like it was
Weren't
later.
weren't they the Robins in 1916?
Yeah, they were the Robins or the Superbas.
Yes, there were several.
I just used Dodgers because that was most familiar, but yes.
Yes, absolutely. Technically, the Robins.
Definitely the Robins, yeah.
It was everything. In Baseball Reference, they call them the Robins because that was what was used colloquially at the time, because Wilbur Robertson, the former Giants pitching coach who helped develop Ferdy Shupp and all that, he, after the 1913 World Series, there are various stories that McGraw blamed him for the loss. There's a story that McGraw said, you caused us to lose this, and dumped a beer over his head. And Robbie walked out of the clubhouse and said, I'm never going back there. And took the Dodgers job starting in 1914. And yes, a lot of ex-Giants did show up. So, I wonder about, like, yes, there was a rivalry. They wanted to beat them, but there's a lot there that they were, that they were still brethren. It's still, it's like players today in a lot of ways. It's like, hey, everybody who's on the other side, regardless, because you played with them coming up, or, a summer league or what have you. So there's a lot to that.
It was the same city. It was the same city that month.
Right.
I just did a thing for Saber on a game in the 1921 season. And the New York Times called them the Robins, and the Brooklyn Eagle called them the Superbas.
Yep.
But nobody called them the Dodgers. So it's interesting. And also, when they played a 3-game series at that time, they played 2 games at the Polo Grounds and 1 in Brooklyn, or vice versa, that was different to me because in the 50s, I'm sure it wasn't that way.
Yeah. No,
Didn't a bunch of those guys get married the same year in Brooklyn? Something.
Well, what it was they were the Brooklyn Bridegrooms for a stretch in the 1880s, 1890s, and they got the name the Dodgers because they were, in order to go through the road, the trolley Dodgers. So they were called the Trolley Dodgers.
Yeah.
So officially, they were never the Robins. They were never the Superbas or Superb or, however the hell you pronounce it. Nobody, I don't know.
They had to change the name from Superbuzz because it wouldn't be, we Giants fans sometimes say that the Dodgers suck. Can you imagine us saying the Superbas suck? Very hard to say.
It's like the same thing with the Yankees. They were called the Hilltoppers or the Highlanders for years because they played up, and it was
there's their insignia.
There it is.
Yeah.
And it's the newspaper guys who's like, listen, Hilltop, look, this doesn't fit. We're calling them the Yankees. And that's how
they
it came
played
about.
at Columbia. They played at the site of
Columbia Press.
Right.
Exactly.
It was a high spot.
Right. So they were, So that names, what we know of as names and all that, which is, copyrighted and this and that, and the colors, even the colors were changed year by year. There was nobody cared. Like the Pirates colors at this time, guess what? They're blue and red. What we know as the Pittsburgh Pirates colors didn't come out until like 1948. Yeah. They were blue and red. You think you're confused wearing an NY in San Francisco. Try wearing a red and blue P wandering around Pittsburgh, and you're gonna be, and they're gonna be like, who the hell are you? What team is that?
A Phillies fan.
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna go after you. Like the Pirates. It's still hard to think of it as that, but they were red and blue, basically red, white, and blue for years because the colors were.
As far as names go, my grandfather, his entire life, who worked for Brooklyn when he was a boy, he called them the Brooklyns his entire life.
Yeah, and that was
didn't matter what their name was. Even when they went to L.A., they were still the Brooklyns.
Very, yeah.
Oh, Red Barber, FOB, full of Brooklyns.
Yep.
Right.
Full of bums.
Right. So that was standard. Like what we think of as like, oh, it has to be this name and this color. It's like, no, changed every year on the whim of the team or the newspaper writers. One of the great writers who I would love to have find his columns for this, because he was a writer for one of the papers that is not archived very well, at least that I could find, is Damon Runyon of Guys and Dolls fame. He was a writer for one of the New York papers at the time, but their archives are very bad. So I relied mostly on the New York Times and then the various other papers, including Fred Lieb and all those guys, because I just went to the papers and really looked up this. But I would love to see some of Runyon's columns or writings at the time. Speaking of other columns that might be of interest, if you guys are golf fans, it was during the time of the streak in 1916 that Bobby Jones first came to prominence on the American scene because he made it to the quarters, I believe, of the U.S. Amateur, which was played in Pennsylvania at the time, and it is where Bobby Jones first met the great Grantland Rice, and their friendship went on from there. And also the U.S. Tennis Open, which was played before the stadium was built. That happened at this time, and there's some history there.
It was in Nationals, U.S. Nationals. The Open didn't start in
Right.
the name didn't start in 1968.
Right.
Oh, you have to go on. Am I on mute? Can you hear me? Oh, did somebody say something?
Right.
The name Open didn't start in 1968.
Right. And the Forest.
But the Forest Hills, I forgot when they started at Forest Hills. It was the women played in one location, the men played in another.
Right. They didn't build that stadium until 1923. So it was still called Nationals, but it was played in a different location. So, but that was going on at the time. Yes, I'd say open because if I say national,
That's what
Yeah.
all of it is, the umbrella at this
yeah,
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
the
Just to
umbrella.
get back to Brooklyn for a minute, one of the world-renowned sports cartoonists leaves Ebbets Field, gets into a cab, and the cab driver turns around and says to him, "How did our bums do today?" Thus,
There you go.
the sports cartoonist Willard Mullen created the Brooklyn Bum.
There you go. No, it's just
The inspiration.
yeah.
Brad Cohen, did you have a question?
Yeah.
How long did it take you to do the research for the
Wow.
book?
The research, well, I did the Kindle edition in 2016, but it was, it's, well, I don't know, like I got into it for a few months. So I had
months.
Well, but I had been thinking about this for years and I had started kind of reading up and doing a lot of it beforehand. But then it was really just a matter of, because I'm a dead ball, I love the dead ball baseball era just because of, what it was. So I knew who a bunch of these guys were beforehand, and I knew a lot of the story of what was happening. It was simply, a lot of it was simply a matter of finding out more about them and their histories, and then the specific games going day by day. The Library of Congress, if you guys want to look, the Library of Congress has a lot of newspapers, full newspapers scanned for years. And so they have the box scores, they have the different game stories and all that. So really it was a lot of, because I was really focusing on 30 days. It was really a lot of just finding the newspapers for those particular 30 days. And it was hard sometimes, because I originally had this grandiose plan. It's like, oh, let's read the Seattle, paper for the 30 days in 1916 and see when they pick up on it. And let's see what the LA Times picked up on it and see what all these, these little papers. But that gets a little overwhelming at times. So I really just stuck with the New York papers. And if that led me down a different rabbit hole, then I would go on that rabbit hole. But yeah, but a lot of it was stuff I already knew. It was just filling in a lot of blanks. And of course, Saber, obviously the biographies of everybody to that helped. But for me, it was all about putting it in context of this and figuring out where that was.
Well,
So
the fact that you like the dead ball area, no wonder you're a Giants fan.
Right.
A lot of dead balls there, no home runs.
Yes. Even now.
How to get
How
that in.
common was it to have just one umpire a game?
It was common, but there were a lot of games, even in the streak, where there were two. And I don't know if that is because it's New York and that's where people were based, or if it was, if it's Giants, Dodgers. I am not 100% on that. But a lot of these games that I found, there are two umpires.
If they have something like enough umpires that half the games would have two and half the games would have one, and they rotated them around. I think Dave Anderson, who wrote a lot about, umpiring, but the Merkel game was pointing out at like a schedule that they had. If there were 6 umpires or 6 umpires, so there'd be two games with 1 and 2 games with 2.
Yeah.
When did they start going to 4
I
umpires?
think by the mid-teens, all the games had 2. I think it changed. Perry, you might know, but sometime around 1912, 1913, where they decided where all the games had 2.
That's actually a good project. I'm going to look that up and find out when the exact transition happened, if there was an exact one. But yeah, I think they did have that pool of umpires for games before 1915, 16, where they would shift them around, working in crews of 2 or 1. And that was why 2 weeks earlier, before the Merkel game, Hank O'Day had been working by himself. And then 2 weeks later, he was working with Bob Emsley, who was on the bases during the Merkel game.
Anybody hear me now? I'm wearing the 33-35 New York Giants cap. First time they ever had black and orange.
It is. There it is, the black and orange. All right.
Where'd you go to get a new mic? It sounded good.
I
Anyway.
screen. I don't know what's going on, but it's driving.
Here we go again.
On and off. But anyway, there are a lot of things. So it's I delve into more than just the baseball and it's just the games. It's more like a running journal of everything that
I think
happened.
the beauty of the book, Alex, is that most of the people here, myself included, have been brought up on the 50s and the 60s, and to know more about the franchise in your book, I think is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that you guys, like I said at the very beginning, for you guys to be learning something from me is I'm honored that I can help in that knowledge. And a lot of these guys ended up being involved in baseball for years upon years upon years. The shortstop for the Giants was Art Fletcher. And Art Fletcher, I know you had your Yankees fan here, Gary, last week, Sam. Fletcher ended up being a longtime coach for the Yankees, and at the time of his retirement, was the guy who had been in more World Series or Octobers by association than anybody else, because he had been with the Giants for years as a shortstop, and then ended up being a coach for the Yankees. Partially managed them for a time, and then was a coach for them for a lot of the 20s and the 30s. And of course, we cannot mention the Yankees without mentioning that Herman Ruth fella, I think is his name. He does make an appearance in here because he was with the Red Sox at the time, and the Red Sox did play the Superbuzz Robins, Dodgers, whatever, in the 1916 World Series. And so Ruth does make an appearance. The 1920 World Series with the famous unassisted triple play. A lot of those guys make an appearance in here. Some were with the Dodgers at the time in that. So
Hank O'Day was at that game too. He
there you
made
go.
He made all 3 calls.
There you go. Hank's everywhere.
And Ruth still holds a record in that World Series. 13 consecutive scoreless innings in World Series play.
Yep. So a lot of that. And the other weird thing, obviously, for that is that the Red Sox borrowed the Braves field to play, as they have a couple of times.
Right.
What are the final times that a World Series was played at a not actual home park until this past year? So
that's right.
So
it was also the first World Series in Ebbets
Yes, very first Ebbets Field, the brand new park at that point. They had so and Grover Cleveland Alexander, he makes an appearance in here aside from with Ferdy Shupp, because the Giants gave him his worst loss of the year that year. They beat him like 8-2 in like game 4 or 5 of the streak, and so there's a lot in there of that. So anyway, it's cool. If you want to read it, fabulous. If not, whatever. I liked it. So so any other questions? Do we have any other questions? Let's see. Is my buddy Parnell still here? Coach, you got a question? Coach.
There we go. I'm with you. So you talked earlier about, you read this as a kid, and this really captivated you. I know we talked about it a little bit. We go way back, and we roomed together for a while, and we called some high school football games together, which was a blast. But we would sit around in our off time, and we would just talk baseball and random factoids and stats, and this came up. What was it that grabbed you? And then you said you were looking for the book to be written and it wasn't there. Can you talk a little bit about what captured you and then the journey to getting to this point?
Well, thank you, Coach. I didn't prompt you on that one at all. I want everyone to know that. It just kind of grabbed me is because it's 26 in a row, and it had to do with the Giants. And it was kind of like, you have to assume, as I did, that this team won the pennant. They won the World Series. These guys are in it, but there was nothing on that. And I just kind of off chance just kept looking for something on this for years, and I just couldn't find anything. So I was between jobs, shall we say, about 10 years ago or thereabouts. And I decided, you know what, it is time to start putting this thing together, because I knew the 100th anniversary was coming up in 2016. I was laid up 2013. So I was like, let's start really looking into this and seeing if somebody has done something on this. And I found some articles, obviously on Sabre. I found Dan's, article on Ferdy and all that, but I didn't. And I found a few articles that would focus on a game or something, but it was never the complete story of this team and those players and what happened to them and were they involved. And you think Giants of this time, you think obviously Mathewson is going to be heavily involved in this team, and he's involved in getting Buck Herzog on this team. He's not involved in it. And you assume that, like that 17-game win streak earlier in the season, if you do a little research into it, well, you see, well, those are mostly the guys who were in it, but the main players like the Ferdy Shupp and Heine Zimmerman and all that are not there. There are some guys who are doing it, and so it just never got there. And with the 100-year anniversary coming up in 2016, I was like, I at least have to do a little Kindle book, even if it's just 50 pages and nothing happens. And so I did it. It was 100 and couple pages. It had a couple of photos in there. And then during last year's Inside Times, I decided, you know what, if I'm going to really update this and get some, update is a weird word for a book of something that's 100 years old, but if I'm going to really make this something and include some real pictures, because I knew what a lot of the guys on the team and the players looked like, but I started realizing that, well, I know this, but I'm writing a book. Somebody who's reading this isn't going to know who, Benny Koff looked like, or Dave Robertson, or the Big Bear of the Ozarks. They're one of their great pitchers, Jeff Tesreau, who ended up being the head coach at Dartmouth for 20, 30 years following this. Like, they're not going to know. So I went through, and the George Grantham Bain collection of these pictures, which is also scanned and uploaded to the Library of Congress, these glass negatives, and some of them are in tremendous condition, and I'm sure have hardly been seen, of pictures of these guys warming up in that. And so it just became I have to do this, and I have to get this out there. And I don't care if 5 people read it. Coach, I don't care if you read it. I don't care if my buddy Brad reads it. I don't care if Mandy reads it. I don't care if only 5 of us read it. It has to be out there. And the fact that, Gary, that you found it, that your sister-in-law found it and gave it to you, and it has opened up to be here and all this. It's just, this is
I got to tell you,
reward.
Not only am I amazed by the amount of research you did, but I'm also amazed, and I thank all of our members here.
I got one question.
I don't think there's a smarter group than
My
you guys
voice coming
out in the
across?
audience. You guys know your stuff, and I applaud all of you. And Alex, wonderful research, really.
Thank you.
Yeah, very nice, Alex. Thank you very much.
My
Frank,
voice
did you have a
coming
question?
across,
We got Frank. Frank's got one.
Gary, Alex, before the coming of the Necro and Perry brothers, what 2 brother pitchers had the most total wins?
Oh,
Christie and
Mathewson's.
Pardon?
It's got to be Christie.
Christie
and
and
his
his
brother.
brother.
Christie and Henry. Henry had 0.
Yeah.
Christie's total on top of Henry's 0 was a
Love that
total
question.
for 2 brother pitchers.
Now,
Hey,
and-
Andrew, are you any relation to Mel Parnell?
Yeah.
we're trying to track that down. We sure hope so. I myself am a lefty, and my brother's nickname is Dusty. If you know anything about Mel's nickname was Dusty, because he was always, he had a
Dusty Rhodes.
right, yeah. Well, within the club and within, when you read the papers, they called him Dusty because he had some nasty breaking stuff, and his breaking stuff would always fool you and wind up in the dirt. And being a lefty in Fenway was rough. But yeah, so there's hopes for that. But we're still trying to track that down. And the Mel is actually our family rotisserie now fantasy baseball league trophy at the end of the
A
year.
little can of worms.
Celebrate the Mel.
Now, an interesting
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. So Alex,
I want to do one thing, Coach,
Go for it.
before you go there. The trivia question actually reminds me of something. For years, the assumption was that Christie had only won 372 games. And because he and Grover Cleveland Alexander were such great rivals, Alexander stayed because he wanted to beat Matty in the all-time National League wins total. So he got to 373 and he retired. And years later, they were going back through Matty's records and discovered that a game in 1908 that they thought that for some reason had been counted as a loss for Matty was actually a win. So they added one more to Matty's record. So that is how, and Alexander, so now Alexander and he are tied for most wins in National League history with 373. And that was decades later. So thank you to that for that reminder. And I do mention this in there because I do go into 1919 a little bit about that. Anyway.
Yeah,
Coach,
you should have won the Merkel game too.
and there's that. A couple of games.
So what you've touched on a little bit then in some of this because man, I love it. But do you have an itch left to scratch with this team or this, kind of in this era? You talked about the streak of pennants. Is there something pre-16 more with something a little more finite with 16 or the years to follow that you're like, oh, now this is the thread I want to pull on?
If I could find Damon Runyon's work from covering this team in September of 1916, if I could find his columns, which I believe, I think where he works, the University of Texas got the archives of that, and I have never been able to really find anything he wrote on this team. But for the guy who wrote the story that is the basis of Guys and Dolls, that is, considered one of the great New York characters of all time, for him to have been a sports writer and to have covered the Giants in 1916.
Why did the University of Texas wind up with his archives?
It is because they were the paper was eventually, I believe, bought by Hearst, and then they split everything up, and a lot of the Hearst stuff from that got to. It may not be the University of Texas.
I assume you tried the New York Public Library. It's fabulous.
What paper was he writing for? Was it like the Herald, a paper that went out of business, or?
Yes, it was a paper that went out of business very early in the 20s. It is in Austin. He covered, the New York American was that. So Hearst owned the paper, or owned the American, and apparently they did not keep full copies of the paper, at least from near as the archive has been able to figure out, but they just the separate articles and donated it to their morgue at University of Texas. So I did try a little search while I was researching the book the first time, and they're like, well, you could hire somebody to go check the morgue, and it's like, I would rather go there myself and get the approval. And
But I assume you tried the New York Public Library because their archive is amazing. Okay.
Yes,
I know somebody that works in the archives there. I mean, you spend your life there. Amazing.
Right. And the other thing is that some of those things are on microfiche, but not available online. And considering the grand total of times I have been to New York is that.
Oh, come on.
I know.
Alex, with your urge to look into this story, was there also an urge when you were in New York to actually go to the site of the Polo Grounds? Did you go?
I did not go. Unfortunately, I was there in the middle of winter, and it was a very poor vacation with a soon-to-be ex-girlfriend and her family. And we went to visit people in. We went to visit.
Not the
people
right
in,
time. You're trying.
No,
to say.
no. We went to visit people in Connecticut. Drove by Bristol, and as a big sports guy, there's a sign: exit ESPN. I'm like, can we go? Blasted right past. So I need to go back to New York and do a proper visit.
By the way, Alex,
better take your umbrella with you. Gary, tell him what happened when you took your class to visit the.
Yeah, I took my class. I wrote a baseball trial on the 51 Giants and the whole sign stealing scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted my kids to really know that there was a stadium there. and we went there, and we were not welcome guests.
Yes.
We were pelted with
Diapers. Yeah.
and food from the towers there.
Yeah,
Not
might just be
but the kids did realize that they're actually, based on the signage there, that there was a ballpark there, and it was important that they knew that. So
yeah,
They thought you were Yankees fans.
I'm sorry.
They thought you were Yankees fans.
Yes, might be just a cruise by, per se, but yes, no, I wanted to go. I wanted to go to Finnerty's, the proper Giants bar there. I'm assuming they will find another place and come back because that's too good. But
no.
Alex, by the way,
any final comments or question? One more question for Alex.
Alex, the founder of ESPN lives in the neighboring community to where I am. Don Rasmussen.
Yes, Don.
Yep. He lives right down the street, basically.
Alex, just one quick thing. Did getting him trading Christy Mathewson with these guys were very close. They did live in the same building, whatever. Was there hard feelings about it, or he figured that he would get a chance to manage and he couldn't really pitch anymore? So they were okay. There was no rift or anything, right?
No, there was no rift. In fact, McKechnie or Ed Roosh, one of the other guys involved in the deal, reports on the train to Cincinnati that Matty was just crying because. While Roosh and McKechnie didn't really get along with McGraw before the trade, Matty was like, "I've just lost the best. I'm not gonna be with the best friend I ever had." So he was devastated by the whole thing, and McGraw saw it. And when he went over to France and all that, and lost his job managing the Reds because of miscommunication with the Reds manager. And so he did not, even though Matty ended up basically putting together most of the team that ended up winning the 1919 World Series, McGraw immediately brought him back when he was healthy enough to coach.
Right.
And, was really instrumental in him in everything else Matty did until the day he died, because McGraw helped him get the job with the Braves when he thought he was well enough to come back into it. So yeah, Matty was devastated, but at the same point, it's like he wanted to manage when his career was done, and McGraw was like, "Well, I can't. It's not going to be here."
Alex, you want to just give your book one more plug with the book cover and where they can get it?
Absolutely. We have 26 in a row. The 1916 New York Giants and baseball's longest winning streak. It is available on Amazon.com. And then my email is in there. I do have a website that I do write some stuff on occasionally. It is called sporadicsentinel.com. I don't update it as much as I could, but I do write some weird baseball things. I'm actually trying to put something together now about how when we're okay and everything is open, the fans are going to come back based on the early 20s, because the early 20s was a building boom for stadiums in this country. All your classic college football stadiums that you know of now, the University of Michigan, the Rose Bowl, the Coliseum, even the original Yankee Stadium, were all built in the early 20s. So, everybody's saying we're not going to come back. We're going to come back hard from this. There are going to be 80,000 people in a stadium here. So it's a little goofy thing, but I do have an email. And like I said, you guys are going to have trouble getting rid of me here, because
please feel free
I am
to come
in
to any of our meetings. It's a pleasure having you. Let's give it up for Alex.
Thank you.
I am in. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you.
Alex, thank you so much.
Very
And
nice.
all of Alex's friends,
Great
thank
job.
you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Gary.
you.
Join us with Alex and any
Thank you. Thank you very much.
next week we got Perry Barber, who's on the call. And if you don't know about Perry, which I've said, she's also, huge into Mathewson. So she's going to be able to fill in any gaps that any of you guys have questions about Christy Mathewson. So we will see you next week. Have a great week in New York. It's supposed to snow. Be careful. Please, if you can and are interested, I will send that link early tomorrow for Ernestine, for you guys.
You can go on tonight.
Or you can go on tonight to sign up for the Saber on
Saber.org, Saber Day. Just Saber.org is all you'll see Saber Day. You can register tonight if you like.